Okay, welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce Jeff Lane, our speaker for today. I've known Jeff for I guess 7 or 8 years now. We met at a meeting of the American Sociology Association when he was a grad student. We were on a panel together. It was like a great panel. Alice Goffman was on the panel. Jeff was on the panel. I want to say like Mark Desmond. It's one of those panels that makes you glad to go to a conference. It was great. So. At the time, Jeff was a grad student. He was going on the job market in sociology, which I suggest was probably not a great idea. Because really, if you want to do work on new tech and communication, you really need to be in communication. So I was really happy when Jeff joined me as a colleague at Rutgers. So today, we're here to talk about Jeff's new book. Jeff's book was just released, I think, in November. Right? We were very lucky to get Jeff on our speaking tour very early. We're catching him kind of at the very beginning of what is a long, wide-sweeping international tour to publicize the new book. It's very exciting. To give you an idea of Jeff's background, so he has a PhD in sociology from Princeton. Jeff is an urban ethnographer by training. He's also a junior fellow at the Yale Urban Ethnography Project, right? And which I don't know much about, so maybe it's Eli Anderson's thing. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so great. So we're lucky to have Jeff here today. I'll turn it over to him. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, thanks so much. Oh, thank you. It's really nice to be here. Thank you, Keith and Johannes and Rachel and the Department of Media and Information and Quello. It's been a really nice visit so far. I got in yesterday and presented some new stuff on, in kind of a very informal way, on social media use in criminal case processing. That kind of came out of this project. But anyway, let me talk to you about the new book. So it's called The Digital Street, and it's about how young black teenagers in Harlem experience their neighborhood through their social media accounts and smartphones. And it's based on fieldwork that I did as an outreach worker in a anti-violence ministry, and then in a variety of other neighborhood roles. And I was looking at teenagers with very multifaceted lives who were experiencing and facing predicaments of street life with each other and police that was playing out in the neighborhood and on the internet. And so I really wanted to look at how teenagers use popular technologies like Facebook and Instagram to manage the risks and the opportunities around them. And then what the neighborhood adults and the police do with this visibility online and this access to black teenagers in Harlem, particularly teenagers in public spaces. And the fieldwork period covers 2009 to 2014. So this is a time that is, I think, a really interesting time to look at, right? It's the Obama administration, of course, if we can think back that far. Harlem Children's Zone is continuing to expand and sort of set the tone of urban education. New York has its first new district attorney after more than 30 years of the previous DA. We have the kind of continued sweep of gentrification. And this is the same time that social media came to permeate all aspects of life, and smartphones became increasingly popular. So the first half of the book focuses on the young people and looks at how they it looks at their experiences as they moved into adulthood and their experiences on the street and then in the various other parts of their neighborhood and how they managed that, and the different platforms they adopted during that time. So there's a chapter on girls and boys, and there's a chapter on code switching. And then the book kind of pivots and looks at the adults, the adult world, starting with a pastor, who I'll talk about a little bit, and then looking at the role of police, prosecutors, and public defenders as well. So I'm going to, and then there's a kind of a conclusion that's keyed to some ideas for youth empowerment and intervention, and a methods appendix on digital urban ethnography, which really amounts to studying the same people in neighborhood, in person, and online. So I'm going to spend most of the time for today on the teens. And one of the keys to the digital street is that it really starts with girls and boys and their exchanges and messages and encounters. And that street life is really organized in person and online through gender roles. And there's a lot to unpack with that statement. So let me just sort of start with Javon and Danelle. These are pseudonyms, and I have a few photos with faces that are used with permission, but I ask that you not photograph anything. And then maybe we can do questions at the end, just to sort of throw that out there. Okay, so this is Javon over here. And one March, I was walking with him and two of his friends, Ren and Pete, were walking along this street. And the three boys pass a teenage girl who was walking in the other direction, and they exchange kind of smiles. And the three guys come after the girl and sort of engage with her. One of the boys knows her already, and they have a very quick hug. And then Javon kind of takes the lead, and he sort of reels off one question after another. Where are you going? Do you have a man? And she doesn't really have time to respond or want to respond to all of these in the moment. And then one of the other teenagers holds up his phone like this and says, hey, we're friends already on Facebook. And the girl kind of moves away from the group, and she's by this fenced-in kind of lot over here. And Javon comes right after her, and he grabs her by the wrist, and he says, stop moving. And he's smiling, and she's smiling, and it's uncomfortable. At least to me, it seemed uncomfortable. And they have this kind of entangled conversation that goes on for a little bit longer, and Javon ends it by saying his name on Facebook. And then Danelle, I would discover her name, I would come to meet her later on, she basically runs off. She goes 1 block west, and the boys do not follow. So I had one kind of interpretation or one idea of what was going on based on having been there. And then I had a different idea as I kind of followed this encounter online. So this is a diagram of a conversation that appears in Javon's Facebook inbox. So hours after Javon aggressively approached this young woman on the sidewalk, the young woman, Danelle, sends Javon a friend request that he accepts. So let me just kind of read through this. You were the boy I was talking to outside, she says. Yep, what's up? Laid up, watching a movie with the munchies. You? Chilling, I don't think I'm going to school today. I feel very sick, just laid up. And then later she says, oh, hope you feel better, thug man. I will, and why do I gotta be a thug man for though? What's up with that, LOL? LOL because of yesterday? LOL yesterday, LOL, I did that because that's me being stupid. I really don't be like that though, but look here, at least I find you pretty though. And then he kind of continues to engage with Danelle, and Danelle kind of engages back and forth, and he invites her back to the street that he lives on and that he hangs out on, and she says she decides not to see him again. So I think there are a number of things that are worth considering here. So first is just that, the kind of contemporary neighborhood experience of girls and boys in public space is really reshaped by the possibility of digital interaction, and that we have a whole cohort of young people that are around each other at these different kind of physical and digital proximities that are kind of shifting and moving in different ways. So that's one kind of point. And the other point is this idea of the digital street that I will kind of continue to kind of bring out through this presentation, is that it might ease some of the kind of tension in face-to-face street life, and it might serve certain kind of protective or liberating functions for girls, but also easing some pressure on boys, perhaps, at least compared to the sidewalk, right? So if we compare this encounter to the physical encounter, the pacing of the interaction is slowed down. There's an engagement happening at a distance. There's an opportunity to kind of go into private and kind of pick apart a kind of public performance. Okay, and then the third point, and this gets a little bit beyond this particular interaction, is just the difference in the position of girls and boys in neighborhood social space. So I think it's significant how Javon acts in front of his friends on their home area, which is on Lenox Avenue, and the fact that the boys do not follow Danelle 1 block west, where they have a rivalry with boys from the St. Nicholas houses. So I'll say more about that. Okay, so one of the ideas that really stuck with me with this work was that on the physical street, right, boys appear very dominant, they're more visible in street life, there's a whole street life literature that centers on the boys, but when you look at the online networks and the content of girls, you really see their power and centrality in neighborhood networks. So this is another girl named Tiana, and she says here that if this post gets 10 likes, she'll name from her friends list the 20 best looking guys she's seen in person. So I think part of why girls gain visibility and control online is because the boys are bound to their blocks while the girls keep moving. So what I mean here is that by middle school, the boys that I met became very limited in where they could travel in the neighborhood. They were limited because of rivalries, because of very aggressive policing, so they felt safest on their home streets. And they called out to the girls, or they invited girls to come see them. right? And dating depended on the mobility of girls. And girls, meanwhile, were engaging the boys in these kind of bounded dating pools at these different kind of proximities. And so, in middle school and high school, girls saw their networks expand during this time. And they were expected to navigate neighborhood risks and opportunities for themselves, but then also the boys on their home blocks were expecting them to kind of broker and find out about and learn about what's going on in the neighborhood more broadly. And so, girls' social media networks end up encompassing numerous neighborhood groups and boundaries. And really, I found that communication in Harlem really flowed through girls and their social media. And this kind of girl network is one of the keys to understanding neighborhood life. Of course, it's a very kind of conditional and gendered form of power. And when girls' social media is kind of joining these neighborhood networks that are separated by turf boundaries, sometimes the profiles of young women become kind of a staging area for boys who are involved in conflict. So this kind of position of girls and their social media at the intersection of neighborhood communication, it was something that kind of elevated but also undercut the mobility and the authority of girls. I want to move forward a little bit with some of the code switching material that I wrote about and the management of reputations and stereotypes and ideas about who these young people are and neighborhood violence. What happens as these things move online? And I want to continue using Tiana's social media with her permission to further illustrate the digital street that social media opens onto and how the kind of physical and digital streets of the neighborhood interact and interconnect. So this is a Facebook post from 2012 from Tiana. And it says, "Gabrielle is lying, but we're going to shake, that's all." And shake means not to shake hands, but the opposite, it means to fight. And this was interesting to me because I had met Tiana a couple years before, and she was 15 at this time, and she was very much involved in neighborhood violence, and she was kind of seen as a fighter. She fought for herself, she fought for her friends, she fought sometimes multiple times a week. She would get a tattoo of her all-girls fighting crew at one point. And this post came at age 17, when she's in a very different position in her life. She's trying to do a Job Corps program in Delaware. She's gone throughout the neighborhoods trying to kind of squash beefs. She's told everybody, "I've officially retired from fighting." She's made this announcement online. She's trying to manage her reputation, change it. And then I see this post which suggests that she's going to fight again. So that was my first reaction. But then as I came to learn more about the post and the background for this post, I found Tiana and we spoke about it. And basically what she had done here was very, very clever. And this post would disappear an hour later. What would happen was she put this up. "I'm going to go fight Gabriella because she's lying about an earlier fight that we had." So she had already She already had this fight. This was the first fight that she had that kind of broke her retirement. But instead of going to fight her again right away, she puts up that she's going to fight her, right? She kind of announces her intention. And a number of people jump in, right? First, some of the girls that she's friends with say, "Hey, I thought you had pledged not to fight anymore. Don't bother, you're going to mess up your face, it's not worth it." And at first she's kind of defensive. And then some of the neighborhood adults get involved. A friend's mother says, "What's going on? What happened?" Her aunt gets on and says, "Look, real friends wouldn't feed you hearsay, particularly if they see you're trying to be a better person. You don't know what this girl said, why don't you just let it be?" And Tiana goes back and forth with her aunt and she says, "You're right, aunt, I appreciate you." And the aunt says, "I love you, Tiana." And she says, "You know what?" Tiana says, I'm just going to delete this. I'm just going to delete this post. And she deletes it. And she doesn't go through with fighting. And to me, this was really, really significant. I mean, the fact that there's an opportunity to announce your intentions and post something online before actually doing it. And the fact that a community and a neighborhood and those who are concerned with young people can observe, watch, and intervene online. And one of the cliches of urban sociology is that eyes and ears on the sidewalk keep sidewalks safe. And in this case, the eyes and the ears belong to family members and adults who are able to sort of see teenagers online and intervene. And Tiana had found this very clever way to kind of walk away from a fight that's ultimately face-saving. She seems kind of like she still seems sort of tough in this interaction. She seems like she's making a more adult decision. And she has kind of this way to this sort of off-ramp to a fight. And that's really significant too. And we know from a variety of literatures that when young people embroiled in neighborhood violence have outs, have face-saving outs, they take them. And I think it gives you a little bit of a sense of the digital street. It's also, I think, significant, too, that this is happening on Facebook, which is kind of an intergenerational network. It's a network in which, in many cases, the parents and the adults were on there first, and then the teenagers came onto Facebook. It's a place where teenagers often use their real names and where you can connect by kinship. So it's kind of an intergenerational platform. So for black teenagers who are experiencing neighborhood violence, trying to get out from under it, social media plays a major role in changing reputations, the provision of social support for new identity projects, the pursuit of education, work, and a more stable adulthood. These are Instagram posts of Tiana when she was a student at Dutchess County Community College. And I also want to bring this up because the boundaries between the neighborhood and school change with social media. Right? There's a concern with neighborhood violence in middle school and high school. It's a concern that has justified the installation of metal detectors and later a phone ban. And it's the idea, right, that neighborhood violence and neighborhood issues are going to enter the school. Okay, and that and that was an issue that I saw, but I also saw firsthand the reverse, right? As kind of scholastic culture flowed onto the street, right? That it also moves onto the street from the sort of school. And I found that traction in school was a status for young people to own, to broadcast very widely, for the adults in their lives, but also very much for each other. That they kind of marked their routes to high school completion and college enrollment, that they marked this out for one another, that they posted screenshots from, getting a high mark, attendance award, an acceptance letter. They talked about the opportunities they had. And it was something that was supported by peers. Right? I mean, I saw playful remarks from friends who might make fun of a particular school. Hey, that college is like the 13th grade, for instance. But I never saw any criticism or hostility of school success in the response comments. And I'm talking about youth who are really involved in violence, and for some of the boys who are prosecuted as gang members. Right? So I think that's really, really important to call out. We could take this to mean, on one hand, that there's this kind of picture of progress and that sort of suggests gains in Harlem schools and neighborhoods, possibly. But I also want to push back and say, on the other hand, things were more complicated on the ground. That youth hardly kind of breezed through school. Students rarely posted their failures. They shared almost exclusively their successes. And that I think what happened was that the teens really posted and validated success online because they understood firsthand how precious it was. That it was fleeting and that forward progress was not a given but an ongoing challenge, and they kind of needed to consistently support and back each other along the way. And Tiana did not stay in school for various reasons that she did not address in her social media. Okay, so to navigate the street code, to navigate neighborhood reputations, requires new forms of code switching, new kinds of street smarts to address the visibility of social media. Social media, we know, joins otherwise segmented and bounded audiences and relationships that are divided by the scheduling and the physical boundaries that people move in and out of each day. Elijah Anderson, who writes about the street code and code switching and this idea that youth need to put up kind of a tough front in their neighborhood, hinges entirely on this idea of audience segregation that Irving Goffman developed. This idea that you can be different people in different times and places because you don't encounter, because you encounter separate groups. And that's, of course, something that's disrupted in social media networks. It's one of the most sort of significant aspects of social media research, this idea of context collapse or the audience problem, that in any of our friend networks online, we interconnect and link all these people that would never otherwise appear in the same place at the same time. So, given that context online, I want to tell you a little bit about a young woman named Sarah. So in contrast to what Tiana did in the previous slide, what's more common, I found, is not so much to reveal neighborhood violence and struggles publicly, but to conceal that and try to manage that and not sort of show the kind of neighborhood adults what's going on. So many times teenagers look to conceal their struggles from the adult world, from employers, from school personnel, to avoid being discredited, right? So the second key to the digital street, along with what I told you about girls and boys and gender, is really managing the boundaries of its visibility. And what Sarah did in this instance is she figured out how to place her street life on the internet in order to kind of meet the challenge of audience segregation. So I met Sarah when she was 18 and she was a student at a college in Brooklyn. I was a volunteer employment counselor at a summer employment program for a few summers, and Sarah was a participant for 2 summers. And she sat in the front, and she was someone who was very eager to kind of counsel her peers and talk about her experiences. She had started college a year early. She had figured out how to navigate financial aid, and she was very sort of proud of what she had accomplished, and she was someone who wanted to kind of share what she learned with her peers. So we have a visitor one day at the employment program, and it's an HR person who says, the first thing we do at my company is we look up our job applicants online. Not surprising, obviously. This is 2012, but still not surprising. And after that meeting, after that workshop, Sarah says to me, hey, look, I had this fight video go up at my high school, and I'm a little bit nervous about it, given what this HR person has said. And we talk a little bit about what happened. And basically she describes getting into a fight with a friend of hers, someone who had been a friend of hers in front of her school in East Harlem. And she said she was a star pupil there. And she described that this videography that happened, right, that it was being videoed by multiple people who were there. And she described it going up on Facebook right away and then going up on YouTube. And she said the very first thing she did was she flagged it and she had it taken down on Facebook, right? But it still existed on YouTube, and it still existed some 2 years later. 2 years later. So we made a plan to watch this fight video together and to talk a little bit about it. So we got together and we watched it and we talked about it. And I said, hey, how come you didn't take it down if you took it down from Facebook? And she said, well, I don't think you can take something down on YouTube if you don't have a YouTube account, which isn't true. Anyone who's logged in can flag content. And she said, look, this belongs to this 11th grade boy who was there, who videoed it, and I didn't know him. So I thought, okay, that might be. But then as I learned a little bit more about the fight, she also talked about it as kind of a resource for her, right? She said, people had sort of thought that I couldn't, stand up for myself and that I couldn't fight, and I did pretty well in this fight. And I got a lot of credit for it, actually. And I said, that's interesting. And then I told her, you could still have this taken down. She said, no, So as I thought a little bit more about it, I thought this was really quite clever what she had done here, because on Facebook, where it's an identifiable platform where she appears in her profile in a clear photograph using her real name, and she has family members there and folks who are connected to her work and to other parts of her life, she prioritized its removal right away. And yet on YouTube, it appears kind of in this grainy photo. You would find this video only if you search for the name of her school and the word fight. There's nothing linking her to it. There's nothing linking her identity to this fight, but those in the know could find it, right? And probably a detective could find it, but an employer probably couldn't find it. Someone at the school probably wouldn't find it. So she had kind of found a place to put her street life on the internet in a way that kind of served her and in a way that didn't discredit her in the wider adult world and for the opportunities that she wanted to have beyond her neighborhood. And that's the kind of savvy that's sort of required for many teenagers, many black teenagers in Harlem who are going through neighborhood violence and trying to get out from under it and are dealing with tremendous, tremendous surveillance and scrutiny. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the teen experiences that I studied and all that they're going through, like in terms of managing kind of discordant identities, multiple forms of accountability, stereotypes, expectations. Let me say a few words about kind of the theoretical project here and the theoretical intervention, which I hope is already becoming clear. Okay, so the work is very much in the spirit of joining urban communication and urban sociology, and especially urban ethnography. And this is a still from the 1992 film Juice, and this is kind of a favorite in Harlem, and it's this kind of cautionary tale about Harlem and a group of close friends who ultimately turn on each other, given neighborhood pressures of respect, gun violence, police. And the urban ethnographic studies of neighborhood effects, of neighborhood experience, of the street code, they left off basically with Juice. They left off before the book that I wrote. I really felt like they were sort of still kind of relating to the media environment as if it was 1992. So in the Code of the Street, Elijah Anderson describes the direct experiences of neighborhood violence and the indirect influence of popular media like films and rap music. And he says that black youth basically relate some of their own experiences and responses to neighborhood violence to the creative expressions of actors and rappers. And it's a connection that's very much in the background of the book. It only takes up a few pages. But this kind of idea and this kind of thinking about media carried forward through the various ethnographies and other books that were written in response to Elijah Anderson. And this relationship between street life and media use, it's moved into the foreground, right? Youth face the same people and problems in the neighborhood that they do online, right? Youth still draw on popular culture, but they live their actual street life in the media that they consume and produce, right? And they move between face-to-face and digital interaction to manage their own situations with others in the neighborhood. And they're seeing their friends, they're seeing their rivals, they're seeing their dating partners in their social media feeds and their own creative production. And so thinking about the kind of role of media and communication and information and how that shapes some of the actions and choices, I think is really, really important. And there's a kind of theoretical goal here, a theoretical project here, to take very seriously the role of digital communication and social media in urban neighborhoods, and even rethinking some of our core urban concepts and assumptions, right? Again, in this kind of spirit of bridging sociology and communication, right? So rethinking girls and boys, rethinking kind of code switching and what that entails. And I think doing this kind of alignment work with communication and sociology is very much in the spirit of the first Chicago school, where the study of communication and media had its origins in community and city. And this is work that Keith Hampton and Vicki Katz have done and have kind of brought together a number of scholars in a special issue dedicated to that very purpose. So I just wanted to say that in a few things about urban communication. So urban communication folks, right, they've been looking at neighborhood effects in terms of the local media that residents use, right? In the late 1990s and early 2000s at USC Annenberg under Sandra Ball-Roquiche and a large group of students and fellows, many of whom are very prominent communication scholars right now, formed the Metamorphosis Project to examine neighborhood communities in Los Angeles. And they were interested in the same kind of urban sociology core issues of neighborhood ties, organizations, belonging, integration, crime, intervention, and they were very much drawing on neighborhood effects research. Only here the focus was on the neighborhood as an environment for communication, right? And there was this kind of focus on neighborhood ties, organizations, and the use of local or ethnic media. And that's what ultimately connected residents, and that's how residents became aware of issues and took action. And this communication infrastructure has evolved, right? It's shifted to talk more about social media and smartphone communication. But I think what's missing here and what I've tried to sort of offer is that we can kind of ground urban communication in the people and processes of urban ethnography, right? And if we want to kind of find urban storytelling networks, we can look first at the everyday lives and social media of neighborhood youth, and then how youth and how the adults and institutions engage in person and online. And that's sort of the very idea of the digital street, to kind of bring some of these ideas about communication to the people and processes that urban ethnographers have been writing about for decades. I want to comment briefly on the world of police and prosecutors and the forensic use of teenagers' social media. So we've seen how social media affords the teenagers new controls over street life by making the neighborhood more visible and allowing teenagers to kind of preview and even displace face-to-face interactions. And one of the points that I tried to make here was that neighborhood risks don't necessarily get worse with social media, right? And it's often the opposite. It's often kind of a way to manage it. It's often an off-ramp. But perhaps the most control has been given to police and prosecutors, right? Social media has offered new kind of tools to suppress neighborhood street corner groups, to suppress violence, and that police are able to kind of access youth and insert themselves into kind of street corner worlds online. And this is an excerpt from direct testimony to admit a gang detective as an expert witness in a 2012 criminal trial. Can you describe, this is the prosecutor interviewing the gang detective to establish that he's indeed an expert witness. Can you describe some of your training and experience as a gang detective? I've gone to gang courses where they teach you different methods of identifying gang member techniques, different types of social media to identify gang members. Talk about it a little bit more. Social media. A lot of gang members like to express who they are using Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Do you actually have a police Facebook account? Yes, I do. Have you monitored and acted with people on Facebook who identify themselves as gang members? Yes, I have. And this detective's Facebook account that he's talking about is likely one that depicted a girl in the neighborhood or else a party promoter. And these sorts of fake pages became part of almost actually all of the juvenile operations in New York City during this time. And through social media, right, police and prosecutors can surveil, they can investigate, and they can prosecute neighborhood youth regardless of cooperation, regardless of legitimacy with the community. It's a frontier and it's an opportunity. And this digital access to young people in the very same neighborhoods that were targeted most aggressively by stop and frisk was, I think, especially appealing given the curtailment of stop and frisk, right? It was ruled unconstitutional at this time, at least in the form that it was being used. This is a New York Times graphic that indicates the racialized and often very violent police practice of stop and frisk, specifically on this corner, where I did a lot of my field work on 129th Street and Atlantic Avenue. And the numbers below indicate also that there was this significant drop during the study period, right? It sort of is spiking up until 2011, and then it's ruled unconstitutional and it's dropping, at least officially, in what's being logged. So it falls from 581,000 to 46,000. And the politicians, the civil rights activists, those who were most critical about stop and frisk were actually very supportive of this online policing, right? And so I thought that was really, really interesting. And if we think a little bit about some of the urban work that's happening at this time, work by Victor Rios, who recently talked about how gang suppression officers spend most of their shift carrying out these kind of youth checks and stops on the street. And Rios saw just how easy it was to generate negative interactions, whether the police started out by being cordial or hostile. And the digital street, I think, provides a much easier pathway to intelligence gathering and data collection, which was the primary purpose of these gang policing tactics. So from the police side, this was an opportunity and one that was, I think, exploited and utilized quite a bit. So between February 2011 and June 2014, the district attorney's office began to hand out a number of gang indictments. And these were gang indictments that defined alleged conspiracies based in part on the defendant's social media activity. And these indictments charged a total of 198 teens and young adults with felonies. And I looked at these documents, and 48% of all the evidence cited referred to social media activity. Messaging, posting updates, and photographs. And these were very effective cases in terms of producing convictions. 198 of those 198 defendants were convicted on various charges. It could be any charge, including even a misdemeanor. But nonetheless, that's an extremely high conviction rate. And social media platforms, of course, encourage connecting and sharing, right, in these social and technical ways that us in this room know about. And this gave great leverage to prosecutors to bring conspiracy charges, right? Social media was helpful to prosecution in two ways, right? It forms associations between defendants or associations between people, and it creates associations with content or activity, right? So to have the sort of the support for the legal requirements of conspiracy, you need a group of individuals, you need 3 or more people, and then you need some kind of indications of criminal activity or planning. And this expanded access to evidence through the visibility of association on social media was in some instances very problematic, right? Particularly in terms of co-appearances and photographs and references to written posts like this one, which seemed broad and prejudicial, right? On or about October 27th, 2011. This person caused or permitted to be posted on Facebook, a status update in part and substance dating, live by the gun, die by the gun, right? Okay, so by now you're probably wondering a little bit more about how I did this research. So let me end with a couple slides on that. This ethnography that I did started in the most conventional way for urban ethnographers. I lived in a neighborhood, Central Harlem. I got my start when I met a pastor. This man here getting bunny ears. I started doing outreach work alongside him. This is a photo from a weekend trip that we took to Wesleyan, which is where I went to college. We did a number of college trips that I helped to organize. We went to Howard University, we went to community colleges, we went to all kinds of colleges. But there was this digital aspect to pastors' work that was interesting. He kind of, I thought, reinvented this long-time social role in urban neighborhoods and black neighborhoods in particular of the street pastor, right? He was someone who, to be relevant and connected to young people, but then also the institutions in their lives, he had to be on and offline with them. And so he had this network. When I started doing the work in 2009, he was following all these teenagers on Twitter. That was the kind of popular medium at that time, and few adults would be there. But he was there. And then he recognized that the adults, the elders, the community members were connected by text messaging, right? So he just would basically move information from Twitter to the adult world by sending these text message blasts. And he would talk about issues and concerns, and he would try to mobilize and rally people to come out and get involved in issues. So right away, I was kind of primed to think about urban neighborhoods as having this digital side, right? I was primed to kind of connect to my field site digitally as well. So like other ethnographers, right, I had to kind of develop my own identity and not just be seen as kind of an extension of pastor. So I took on other neighborhood roles. I worked as an employment counselor. I created a computer lab for youth and for seniors. I organized basketball games. I did a number of things. But on top of this neighborhood fieldwork, and to do this neighborhood fieldwork meaningfully, I needed to also be in the social media and feeds and social media networks of the community. So in these face-to-face relationships, however complicated they may be, I was always kind of grounded in, these relationships were always kind of grounded in neighborhood roles and ongoing face-to-face rapport, connection, living in a community, however conditional my membership may be, but living in a community, getting to know people over time, being there with my wife, my dog, using the same businesses, eating together, spending time, that was the basis of connecting online, right? I didn't start with kind of access to the field site online. I wanted to kind of ground it in this sort of classic rapport and relationship building of ethnography or urban ethnography. And then these connections carried forward to social media, right? First on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram in that order of adoption. This was my, over here on the left, was at one point my Facebook network. And these relationships and these roles, which are so unique, right? An ethnographic role there's nothing exactly like it in everyday life. It might look like certain relationships we have in some ways, but they're really unique roles and really unique relationships. And this is how two of the young people in this study entered me in a phone. So Javon entered me as mentor Jeff, and that was consistent with how he introduced me to the adults in his lives and how he often talked about me. And then his cousin Christian entered me in his phone as White Jeff, which I think is important for a number of reasons. But when I asked him, what made you enter me as White Jeff in your phone, he said, well, I have two other Jeffs who are black. I said, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I thought it was interesting because my relationship with Javon was one that had this kind of mentorship aspect. He would seek my advice. He had projects and things he needed from me and wanted me to do. And we had kind of a standing meeting on Sunday where we would sort of check in on his life, et cetera, et cetera. And that wasn't what Christian was interested in. He didn't want that kind of relationship with me. I was a white guy in the neighborhood doing this project, and we had a different kind of relationship. Okay, so I wanted to kind of bring forward that these are face-to-face relationships built on neighborhood fieldwork that then extend online. And then once you have that as your context, the kind of method here, and this method of what I'm calling digital urban ethnography, is really based on connecting online offline communication and not taking either at face value as much as possible, at least, right? And you continue to kind of bring the authors back to their content and ask how and why they said what they said. and then to be able to kind of compare their self-reports to the things that you know, or the things that I knew about these people from having spent time in person and online. So constantly kind of comparing, saying and doing online and offline, and using these using these multiple data layers to kind of complement or confirm the things that I was learning. And that's really what mixed methods is about as well. So trying to kind of leverage the study design as much as possible, and being specifically curious about the connection between the digital and the face-to-face. Okay, so thanks for letting me talk for a while, and I hope I've shown some value, I think, in bringing sort of sociological and communication perspectives together in the context of urban life and community. I hope this book is a warrant for revisiting some classic urban ideas now that neighborhoods are connected on and offline, and thinking a little bit about how residents and institutions are in each other's lives in person and through technology and media. And I probably have much more to say that I didn't, so I'll take questions and feel free to ask me anything, and thanks for listening.
Great. Questions for Jeff? I have one I'd like to ask.
Okay.
I've been fascinated by the interaction you started with the boys and girls meeting on the street, and then how quickly it moved into an online kind of continuation of that encounter. But the thing that really got me was the fact that they were already Facebook friends.
Well,
So how does that? I also don't completely understand in the Bronx how schools overlap with blocks overlap with these different kind of boy groups, and how the girls are moving in between them, right? So this friendship formation online, what tends to happen first? Like, do boys and girls meet at school and become friends online? Like, how did you get like an anonymous girl? It seems so risky when you talk about like the police presence. How does that happen?
Sure. So this was in Harlem. I live in the Bronx now. This was in Harlem. This is Javon has not met this young woman before, but one of the young people that he's with, when the three boys are walking together, they're already Facebook friends, right? So Javon wasn't a Facebook friend at this point. And then one of the other boy, there were three boys. The third boy was, I think, probably also Facebook friends with the girl, but they knew each other. They knew each other from school, and they hugged quickly. I mentioned that point. And so Javon, at the end of that encounter, tells Danelle his name on Facebook. So then she, hours later, sends him a Facebook request, a friend request. And then she kind of flips it. She says, you were the boy I was talking to outside, which wouldn't be the first way that I would report how that interaction went. But anyway, so she builds this kind of connection after the fact. But I guess the point that I wanted to make was that this is a whole kind of cohort of teenagers that are potentially connected online and in their schools, in their neighborhood, and that there are all these different kinds of lines and layers of relationships that are starting in person or starting online, and they might be sort of moving through different stages of contact, right? You might start with a kind of friend request, and that's often how a lot of girl-boy contact starts, right? You send, this is true everywhere, right? You send a friend request, it gets accepted or not. If it's accepted, you're now connected in some vague way that provides some level of new access, but it doesn't necessarily need any more than that, right? Then there's an opportunity to comment on each other's wall. Then there's an opportunity to send an inbox message, which may or may not be reciprocated. Some can be deleted at any point. But there are all these kinds of like stages and spaces of communication also before necessarily meeting in person, right? So I think that's significant. If we think about social media as kind of a buffer and a way to kind of manage attention, particularly for girls and boys, that's really relevant here. So there's a lot of sort of research ethics and dilemmas in this kind of work. So at this point now, I know Javon well. He trusts me enough, and is also being, and there's so much more to talk about all these relationships, but he trusts me enough, and we have, this is 10 years later, I just saw him a few weeks ago, we've been in each other's lives for a while. He says to me, hey, you know that girl that I talked to? She sent me a friend request, and then he showed me his inbox, which is very personal space, right?
But that gives me access to this young woman who is not a consented member of this research at this point, right? She's now, I'm now sort of seeing into some of her private life and some of her private communication. So what do I do at that point, right? Do I try to like keep this person out of the study and not quote them, for instance, and just kind of summarize it, right? I mean, I'm still taking for granted some level of access to the network. But in this case, I wanted to really use this interaction. I thought it showed me a lot, and I wanted to be able to present it to people. And so I also wanted to get this young woman's account of what happened. So I got in touch with her, and I talked to her, and I told her who I was, and then Javon also reached out to her, and then I said, hey, what was your account of how this all went? And we talked about this interaction, and I said, hey, how would you feel about me making this into a graphic? She said, okay, I'm okay with that. And we went back and forth for a little while on this, but she was open to it. So now she's become part of my research in this new sort of way, right? And that's what's so hard about this method also, that you're consistently connected to people who aren't originally in the research. And then you have to decide if you're going to keep them out or you're going to bring them in. And how are you going to negotiate that consent and what are you going to do? And yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned code switching, but then I didn't have time to get into it very much. I guess feel free to mention anything you want about it.
Sure.
And I was listening to a podcast this morning about sociolinguistics and things like that, so it's on my mind. But I'm especially interested in if you have insight into how code switching differs or doesn't in the online space versus the offline space.
So code switching can mean a lot of different things, right? I mean, that's kind of a sociolinguistic tradition that is different, I think, from the urban ethnography code switching literature. I was kind of relating to that urban ethnography code switching literature, and particularly the idea that teenagers are under sort of pressure to kind of perform toughness in the neighborhood. And so, as this goes online, as some of those kind of expectations and pressures go online, it's a fundamentally different environment than a neighborhood block where no one beyond that neighborhood presumably would see or know what kind of things happen. On the internet, obviously, it's a much broader audience. There's preservation and searchability to the online content, as we all know about. But particularly, what's interesting, I think, for young people is that they have these kinds of different platforms that incorporate different aspects of their network. And so when I started the research on Twitter, there weren't really adults in that space. And one of the things that gave Pastor kind of leverage and that made him this important figure was that here's this 50-year-old guy in the networks of teenagers who has this kind of like entree into some of the things that they're going through. And then he would kind of relay that to their parents and their adults in this very strategic way, which I thought was interesting. Now on Facebook, this was a medium that the parents had started on, right? So, and what's also happening during this time is like teenagers are adopting these platforms and moving on to the next one. So, Twitter there was one kind of way of being on Twitter, and then a very different way of being on Facebook. And there was this very sort of clean audience segregation, technical sort of structure, right, where you could sort of be different people for teenagers in the neighborhood, and someone else when you're dealing with some sort of mixed company. That didn't sort of hold. And I don't have a great explanation for that, other than there just seemed to be this broader adoption happening where this group of young people had gone from AIM to a site called Skonex to MySpace to Twitter to Facebook to Instagram. They're just kind of going. And as they're using these sites, they're adapting, of course, to the designs of the site, the audiences that are on those sites. And so once they got to Facebook, now they had this kind of intergenerational platform. And then they had to think about new ways to manage kind of street code and neighborhood stuff. And so one way was just to create a membership-only group page that was just the kids again and make it like Twitter. But that wasn't always what happened. And so now you've got the kind of mixed company of the adults. And so if you want a way out of things, and if you're looking for some support, and if you're trying to appeal to the adults in your lives, well, there's an opportunity to do that on Facebook that wasn't there on Twitter. And some people embraced that opportunity. I thought Tiana embraced it. Many others thought it was risky and dangerous to expose the things they were going through on Facebook for good reason, right? Because employers and school personnel, et cetera, were also potentially there to access that. So then you could sort of encode your language and try to sort of encrypt messages to each other. There's a lot of subliminal messages, right? Messages that are kind of hitting at someone's insecurity without naming the person. So that was something that happened a lot. And then there was more and more use of the inbox for things that would otherwise happen on the wall. And then meanwhile, the cops are increasingly using this material as well, and the teenagers are becoming increasingly aware of that. So then some of the kind of code switching and managing identity stuff was also becoming sensitive to police and how some of what they were saying online could be used against them, particularly in these indictment cases, as the indictments are kind of building and creating an idea that, my status update could be evidence. So now there's sort of new messaging that's happening there. There's people saying, saying you're hot, right? Like you're hot, something that people would write, like before something was written about that could be incriminating or could be used against them. That was something they sort of said. And then they would sort of instead have that conversation in the inbox, or else they would have it face to face. And then the police moved into the inbox, so then it was no longer safe to use the inbox space. So it was kind of a cat and mouse thing.
I mean, just do the question after Kirsten.
You go first. No, you do it.
Well, Mike, actually, you answered a lot of my questions. I was going to ask you, I thought that, first of all, this was super interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you more about sort of the role of the platforms themselves, the way that they're organized and what they afford and what they don't, and is how big a part of that is either of your story book-wise or of the story in terms of what's permitted to happen, in terms of how these things play out.
I think it's relevant. I think the designs and some of the policy decisions around some of these sites, I think, do matter. Maybe one of the best examples, apart from the stuff I just sort of told you about, would be that a lot of how NYPD began to build a alternative gang universe, right? Basically, what was happening was there was, a set of detectives that were the gang detectives, and then there was an officer who was very entrepreneurial, and he was the head of juvenile justice, and he was the head of the schools, school safety. And in around 2006, he started to go online and follow teenagers.
Surveillance pioneer.
A surveillance pioneer who totally changed NYPD. And it's very much connected to the platform, so I'll get there in a second. He starts to follow teenagers online, and most of the police, by the way, can't use social media because police computers have a blocker, right? Because they don't want police on company time to be on social media, and cops are discouraged from posting things on social media, right? You can imagine why. So he starts on a site called ScoMex, which was a kind of tri-state area site that didn't last too long, and then on MySpace. He got tremendous access. Now, MySpace is a low-security site. It's a site that was very customizable, right? A site in which you can embed graphics, film files, and a variety of things in the text boxes, right? And you could sort of create a very unique sort of platform, one that is kind of the opposite of Facebook, which is very controlled, right? And then the young people at the time were keeping all their photographs on PhotoBucket, which is a free photo storage site. Right, and this is kind of the era where people have digital cameras. They're starting to now have a phone that has a camera. This is 2006, 2007 in the beginning. So people are using PhotoBucket. PhotoBucket also has low security. And by default, if you take a photograph that lives in the PhotoBucket account and you put it somewhere else and you embed it somewhere else, include it on your MySpace page, it becomes a link into that album. So someone can view that entire contents of the album if you copy and pasted a photograph or take that URL and put it in this new field. So MySpace, young people are putting selective photographs, very selective versions of themselves. And then police, this one officer sees that when you scroll over this photograph, it's clickable, right? There's no sophisticated technology here. It's just very simple stuff going on. And so he's got this back door into PhotoBucket, right? So mind you, low security MySpace, low security PhotoBucket, and now he's sort of seeing a whole cohort of young people's full photographic libraries. And so they would begin to, these are tens of thousands of photographs. And these are scenes from adolescence. I mean, I saw some of these photographs, right? So these are like, sleepovers and birthday parties and family events, but there's also some stuff about neighborhood violence, and there's some stuff that's related to, crews or gangs. And they begin to collect photographs that show groups together and have added letters of either 2 or 3 name groups, acronyms, so that sort of becomes seen as a gang definition. They collect RIP photographs. They collect photographs that have a gun, whether that gun is functional or BB gun or whatever, but they collect these gun photographs. And then this guy begins to build this kind of new universe of groups, and he starts with 10 groups, and he submits his list, and he begins to share it with the community. He was telling the community what he was doing, which was interesting. And then next time around, he's got 30 groups, And then he's beginning to kind of show that there are actual connections between shootings and some of this online content. And he keeps doing it and doing it. And then he begins to connect Harlem to the Bronx. And he sort of uproot the whole gang division, and they basically sort of shift their model to really use social media in this new sort of way to define the groups and to manage these sort of gang lists. And then the gang detective, so the gang detective that we hear from in 2012 is now being retrained on social media in 2012. And this person became an assistant commissioner in the NYPD. And he was also interesting because he would show up at the employment program where I worked, and he would show up at schools, and he would say, "We are following you on social media. I have a liaison on Facebook. I call him. I'm watching you, and I'm collecting this material." And he sort of kind of putting it back on young people, but it was interesting. He was kind of talking that I almost think he felt somewhat embarrassed by or guilty by the sort of access that he had to it in some ways.
What do you mean you have a liaison at Facebook?
So Facebook has a whole online web portal for law enforcement to process their requests, and then
So like an advertising.
and they have staffing for and it's different because that same
It's a full service.
it's full service, but it's not. But the public defenders do not have their own online portal, do not have a liaison, and it's very hard to get them to. And for Facebook doesn't answer their subpoenas, so it's not equitable in that sense. Yeah.
Hi. So there wasn't a lot of talk. You didn't talk a lot about reflexivity in your research.
Yeah.
But how do you methodologically and ethically consider your social position versus your research subject?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. It's something I've thought about, struggled with. For me, I basically try to have relationships that were built over time. I tried to be sort of upfront about things that I was writing about and interested in, and I tried to bring people into the research as much as possible. I was, as I was interested in sort of online side, it was sort of expected that I would know what was going on online, and people would sort of ask me, "Did you see me on the road?" And it was, it was pretty clear that I was doing this kind of online ethnography, and I was expected to kind of keep up with it once I had sort of been around for a while. So trying to sort of bring in people into the research at all times, trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that you want from me? What can I do given that I have resources? How can I be of service to you? How can we be, what are the things that you're interested in? How can I help? Trying to sort of help in ways that I felt I could help or where I could help. There's still an inherent sort of power imbalance there. I also felt that the young people that I met very much wanted their stories out there and wanted some of the things that they experienced to be known, and wanted sort of change and wanted things for young people who are growing up in this neighborhood to know about and understand, and wanted some of what they went through to be out there, to be an opportunity for others to learn from it. So that didn't mean that they necessarily wanted to, I've been trying to bring in people to some of these talks, and I've done that. I've done that with pastors, I've done that with young people. They don't necessarily want to do that. Sometimes it's like, okay, you go to it, you go present it. So it's a little tricky, and you don't want to sort of say, oh, you have to come and be here and validate my research for me or something. So it's a little bit of a dance there. But trying to bring people into the research at all times. I do think there's information and value in this for community leaders, for even for the police and public defenders. I think it's really important for them to sort of have a context of online production and to sort of understand, the reasons why young people are posting what they're posting, and not take it at face value. So I think showing some of the complexity of young people has they've got an ethical project. But I think there's also just some fundamental imbalances and issues that I don't know what I can totally do about it. And I think there is, ethnography has an aspect of exploitation in it, and that's insofar as you do feel that you can present people's stories as data, and you do feel that you can do that. And I think the question is, well, how can you build community partnerships? How can you be, productive in what comes out of your research? And I try to sort of think about that, but there is some level of just imbalance.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. We're out of time. Some people are joining Jeff for lunch, so
yeah. We can talk more about
part of that conversation.
Yeah, I don't know if that answer was as satisfying as it could have been, but